it will be difficult for Ross to win this game, and post-board, Reid will have a lot more sweepers.
Yeah. Ross is, walking into this match, if he's going to win, he has to anticipate game one goes well for him. And now he's got his work cut out for him.
Well, Ross did win the die roll. He's on the play. 5-card hand. Reid is on 7. Ross will start on Birchlore Rangers. And you mentioned that on a 7-card hand, at least, Elves really puts a lot of pressure on Miracles to have a sweeper here.
A single copy of Swords to Plowshares is probably not going to do a lot of harm to Elves most of the time if they have a substantial draw. On 5 cards, the 1-for-1 trades start adding up.
Yeah, as far as combo decks go, Elves is not a linchpin style combo deck. There's not one thing you need to get.
Exactly. There's combo decks that are critical mass decks, and then there's combo decks that are slap A and B together. Reanimator, Sneak and Show, it's just find something. Find your 2 cards, find your 3 cards. For a deck like Storm or Elves, it's about critical mass and assembling this massive resources, and so mulligans are much more damaging.
Yeah, that said, if Reid cannot assemble a lock early, Ross does have ways to recoup these cards. Things like Elvish Visionary and Wirewood Symbiote can really do a lot of work for Elves in this matchup.
For sure. Although Reid with this Divine Top, and I believe Terminus in hand, so if he's able to find something like Brainstorm, even Counterbalance, Ross is in a lot of trouble.
The ways that Miracles get their early victories, we see here, you're right. Ross has this turn 1, or Reid rather, has a turn 1 Divining Top. An early top plus Counterbalance can be bad news. Ross on this turn attacks for 1, then plays, rather he simply casts a Nettle Sentinel and then casts Quirion Ranger, untapping Nettle Sentinel. Remember, Birchlore Rangers lets him tap 2 Elves to make a mana. That mana was used to cast the Ranger, and since Ranger is a green spell, he untaps Nettle Sentinel on casting it.
Keep in mind that I believe Ross's last card in hand is Natural Order. So we could see Reid put to the test the very next turn, even with Ross only on 5 cards.
Yeah, you have to think Reid does not have the Brainstorm. He's going to spin his Divining Top on upkeep, obviously hoping to see something like Terminus that he could set up for Ross's next turn. But readjusts and draws. Do see a copy of Swords to Plowshares in his hand. Will he take out a key piece? There is a Terminus here as well. He will play a land and pass back.
I think Reid's most likely plan here is to, if he absolutely positively has to Swords to Plowshare something to stay alive, he'll go ahead and do that. And otherwise, he's going to use the opportunity to Brainstorm, put Terminus on top, sweep Ross's board, and leave Ross with essentially no resources.
If Reid can get this Terminus off, it seems like Ross is all in on Reid not having it. Ross went ahead and fetched for Dryad Arbor on Reid's end step as well. And with Ross doing that, Reid will, as you said, use the mana to use Swords to Plowshares. He's feeling some pressure here.
Well, it's a lot of mana going into next turn, and Reid understands the threat of Natural Order here.
Yep. He takes care of Quirion Ranger. Quirion Ranger lets Ross return a forest to untap a creature. With Dryad Arbor, it is a source of a lot of mana. Reid's trying to keep Ross contained for at least one more turn.
Even though Reid's going to potentially sweep up Ross's board, he's still willing to use the plow here because if Reid is able to get this Terminus off, the rest of the game is probably elementary. It's very easy for him to win from there.
Ross with untaps, he has 3 mana here. It's 1 away from a Natural Order. I believe that is why he went ahead and got rid of the Quirion Ranger. If it's in play, Ross has a guaranteed 4 mana and a possible Natural Order here. But Ross looks like he'll have 4 anyway. It's going to be Heritage Druid. Heritage Druid taps all 3 Elves to make 3 mana. 4th one with Dryad Arbor. He's going to get a Natural Order off if Reid doesn't have a Force of Will.
And there are going to be 4 creatures in play, so that's 8, 13, 15.
The question is it lethal? I don't believe so. It'll be very close. Ross here sacrificing the copy of Heritage Druid. That's going to be Craterhoof Behemoth. He comes into play, gives all of Ross's creatures +4/+4 in trample for 4 creatures here. It's going to swing in. The Craterhoof is a 9/9. The Nettle Sentinel is a 6/6. You're absolutely right. 15 damage screaming across the battlefield, and Reid is down to 3.
Yep. I mean, this is going to be a little bit short, but he's at least putting Reid to the test. He's saying you had to have one of your Terminuses right now. I know you don't have that many in the list. Things are not getting better for me, so I like going for it here.
That's something Ross said before he had sideboard cards. A lot of times what he likes to do against Miracles, even when they play 4 Terminus, is he plays game 1 as though they don't have Terminus. Once he saw that Reid only had 2, he said that was for sure going to be his strategy going into this game.
When you try to play around everything, you end up playing around nothing. against control decks at least, because they have so many different elements. If you're too slow, you can start losing to the Jace the Mind Sculptors and the Swords to Plowshares of the world. So often it's better just ignoring some element of their deck.
Exactly. We see here for Reid, he's going to go ahead and brainstorm main phase, putting cards back on top of the deck. Believe the top card is a Terminus. He has a Divining Top. As long as he has, and yeah, he has a white mana untapped, so he should be able to sweep Ross's board. Reid on Ross's upkeep is going to cast Brainstorm, reveals the first draw. It is one of his 2 copies of Terminus. He will Miracle it, which means all of Ross's creatures will be sent to the bottom of the deck.
And at this point, the rest of the game is probably just incidental. You know, it's going to be very hard for Ross to assemble a board of much substance here.
And if you look back to the turn with the Swords to Plowshares play, if Reid Swords to Plowshares is anything else or doesn't have Swords to Plowshares, Quirion Ranger by itself would have given Ross 4 mana and enough creatures in play to make the Craterhoof Behemoth lethal that turn.
And that's a turn 3 kill off of a mulligan to 5.
All of this has some very powerful stuff going on in it. So after losing all his creatures and his Dryad Arbor, Ross draws a card. And looks like he has no plays, no elves. And it'll be back on to Reid.
And Reid with a very powerful hand, Source of Plowshares, Council's Judgment, Dig Through Time.
Yep, goes ahead and passes back. Ross plays Wooded Foothills. Reid is gonna, looks like spin top, then maybe Dig Through Time here. Just actually be a straight Dig Through Time, delving 4 cards. And the card he's looking for, Counterbalance, you'd assume?
Counterbalance would be, I would guess, the top of the list. Jace the Mind Sculptor would not be bad.
Really just some way to win the game.
Yeah, it's... And failing to find that, just ways to protect himself.
Yeah, it looks like he grabbed a Brainstorm and another blue spell here. Maybe perhaps Force of Wills. We see one of those has now been added to his hand. He'll untap, upkeep, spin the Divining Top. More blue cards available, including another copy of Dig Through Time. And Ross has done a great job of getting Reid so low, down to 3, but is there any way Ross can sneak a point across those last points of damage? That's got to be what Reid's worried about right now.
Well, there are 2 copies of Dryad Arbor in the list, which means his Wooded Foothills can go get that. If Reid, of course, has an answer ready with the Swords of Plowshares. And then at that point, Ross just has to hope to top deck enough threats, and now at this point they need to be 2 mana threats because Counterbalance plus Divine Top is established.
Yep, and Ross did exactly the play you mentioned. He fetched for Dryad Arbor. Reid was at the ready with Swords to Plowshares, so the second Dryad Arbor... Well, actually, rather, Ross still has a Dryad Arbor left in his deck. The original one was put on the bottom with Terminus, so he
Correct.
still does have one in there. But once one is exiled, it does mean he'll have to play all his threats at sorcery speed, so it means they'll, 1, will have to resolve around Counterbalance, and 2, Reid can get rid of them with something like Jace or any sorcery speed removal. It will be difficult. Reid simply drawing a card and passing the turn. He's going to hide behind Counterbalance and Sensei's Divining Top for the time being.
Yeah, there's no rush for Reid to act because he knows at this point most of Ross's deck is shut out.
Elves, a powerful deck, but does not have a great diversity of mana costs.
And also, Elves has a real tough time, at least game 1, beating the first sweeper. You know, it rarely has a lot left to have a second wave unless you've had Wirewood Symbiote plus Elvish Visionary going.
He's going to go for another Dig Through Time here. And there's a copy of Jace the Mind Sculptor. That's said Counterbalance would be the good defense, and Jace would be how he wins the game. It looks like he's setting up for the kill.
Exactly. And I think that if Reid's able to get this Jace into play next turn, he's just going to start Fate Sealing because Counterbalance plus Top locks up the majority of Ross's reasonable draws, and the Jace will make sure that anything else gets Fate Sealed to the bottom.
Yeah, with Divining Top and Counterbalance, you can always use Divining Top's second ability to put itself on top and counter any 1-drop, and Ross's deck is almost entirely 1-drops.
And Reid, I believe, has a Counterbalance floating in his top cards right now, which means that he has every 2 locked up, which means this is as hard of a lock as you're going to see.
Ross waiting to see the Jace. Once Reid resolves it, Ross will scoop it up there. Does not need to be fate sealed to death. And 1-0, Reid takes game one in the matchup.
That's a huge deal for Reid. Of course, winning game one, always a big deal, but he picks up a lot in the sideboard as well. So Reid with an Engineered Explosives, a Baneslayer Angel, 2 copies of Peacekeeper, Blue Blast, Flusterstorm, Force of Will, Red Elemental Blast, 2 Spell Pierce, 2 Collect, a Supreme Verdict, and a Terminus. The 2 sweepers are going to be great to bring in here, the Supreme Verdict and the Terminus. I think the Engineered Explosives is good in this matchup. I'm curious to see if Reid brings in the Peacekeepers, because it is a lock against Elves, but Ross does have Abrupt Decays in his sideboard he's bringing in anyway. So does Reid want to increase his exposure to that? We'll see.
That is, Reid Peacekeeper is certainly one of the spicier cards in Reid's deck. Remember, this is the Players' Championship right now. Reid Duke and Ross Merriam. This is for the 2014 championship. It's the culmination of our season. But after this, we will have 2015, and with 2015 comes the new set of tournaments and the 2015 edition of Next Level Magic. This book, written by Patrick, the Innovator Chapin, recent Pro Tour champion in 2014, has taken his classic book here on Magic the Gathering strategy and has updated it for the new year. The new 2015 edition is now back in paperback. You can get it online at starcitygames.com/NLM. And for those of you who like reading more on computers instead of books, it now is in ebook as well.
Yeah, very excited about this update. New examples, an updated edition, now again available on paperback, which it has not been for about 10 months, and of course still available in PDF as well.
I was going to say, even as someone where I played a lot of Pro Tours before, I actually got my hands on this book and got a chance to read through it, and it was really helpful. If one thing you can say about Patrick Chapin is his Magic theory is unparalleled in the community.
He has been the preeminent Magic theorist now for multiple decades, and his body of work speaks for itself.
Looking at Reid's sideboard, one of the things you mentioned, this was his inclusion for the tournament. He said it was his silver bullet for Tom Ross, which he'll get to try out next round. It is the 2 of Peacekeeper. You see the 3rd card down there. But it's actually had a lot of other applications this weekend with people playing Reanimator. And as you said, even Elves, Reid may be bringing it in more than he had thought.
I think so. On Ross's side of the table, you see a Null Rod, a Pythian Needle, a Reclamation Sage, a Scavenging Ooze, a Sylvan Library, 3 Abrupt Decays, a Progenitus, 3 Cabal Therapy, 3 copy of Thoughtseize. I think the 3 Abrupt Decays are coming in for sure. It has to answer Counterbalance because his deck is so dense with 1 mana spells. On top of that, he's got to kill Peacekeepers. I think some mixture of the Null Rod, Pythian Needle, Reclamation Sage action will be coming in as well. I'm not sure if he's going to bring in all that stuff, but he wants to be able to answer Sensei's Divine Top. There's also an Engineered Explosives hanging out in Reid's sideboard, so I think some of the artifact removal is warranted.
Yeah, definitely. Ross needs some way to break up these pieces. Reid is able to get locks down so quickly, and Ross is pretty soft to them, as we saw in Game 1.
Yep.
Now, on our other match, Brian Bronduin and Brad Nelson at the feature match table. Game 1, that's going to go to Brad Nelson. At 1-0, he's looking to get a commanding 2-0 start and maybe just get his way straight into the top 4.
And for Brian Bronduin, who started off so well in Standard, could be a very quick end to day 2 here. Already down a match, lost to Gerard Fabiano in a landslide last round and down a game against his buddy Brad Nelson.
And one thing you have to say with Brad is in a tournament with 16 people, a lot of metagaming is going to happen. The players going into this, I saw them with charts. They knew who each of the 15 players were, trying to predict, well, this player likes to play deck A, deck B. I think in a situation like that, where you know about half your opponents in a small field, Brad Nelson is a juggernaut to play against.
Perhaps the best metagamer that is active, certainly in the Open Series. And in a tournament this small, where you know so many of the people intimately, that is a huge edge.
For Ross Merriam, as we said before, this person from Middletown, Connecticut, he is one of our stars on the tour this year, really making a name for himself. Elves has been his weapon of choice for quite a while in Legacy. Talking about metagaming, he said he really wanted to metagame for this event, knowing that could be a difficult tournament for Elves, and he had a couple things worked up, but said at the end of the day, his experience with Elves just outweighs anything else.
I think that happens a lot with Legacy players. The format's so hard to play, and experience with a particular deck, I think, is worth more than having the best deck in an absolute sense for a tournament. At a certain point, you get priced in. This happens to Joe Lissette, even though he's mixed it up for this event with Reanimator. Ross is one of those players as well.
Yeah. So Ross, at 1-0, a 2-0 finish here could really get him into the top 4. And you mentioned with Lissette, someone who we see on Miracles all the time. One of these people with hundreds of matches but under their belt with one deck. He is playing a new deck, but when you talk to him about it, it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. He actually said this is something he had been working on for months and was keeping it secret for so long. Had it ready for even Grand Prix New Jersey last month, but said it just wasn't good enough.
If you're familiar with Joe Lissette's stream, he mixes it up. He's not only on there playing Miracles, he plays all sorts of different decks. Of course, he hasn't really played anything other than Miracles in a live tournament.
Yeah, when it comes to crunch time, I like it. He plays a lot of decks, but when it comes to a big tournament, he is very conservative about only wanting to play things that he feels he is excellent at.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is like a really great way to approach it. You know, practice with a lot of decks, but play your best.
And just get familiar with the other side of the table. I know when I was getting in a lot of reps with Burn, it was helpful for me to have someone else play Burn and play some other deck to get familiar with the lines of play that I was afraid of being in the other seat.
I mean, absolutely. I remember when I've learned my combo decks, learning how playing against them is very important. I can, you suddenly learn, okay, well, I know that this interaction is something I never want to see as a combo player. Well, maybe I'll try it against them.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's good to see both sides of the table. I think it's valuable for testing.
Game 2, some mulligan action, perhaps going the other way. Ross with a keep on 7, but Reid down to 6.
Though this is a deck that's really robust at mulliganing. Once you have Divine Top and play your deck runs so efficiently, and between Divine Top, Brainstorm, and so on, you get a lot of looks at cards. So Miracles, not a bad deck as far as mulliganing concerned.
Yeah, Reid Duke here on your right. He is the pro of the tournament. Had a rougher start to the day, but it's hard to keep him away from the finals. With 3 World Championship appearances, a 3-time Grand Prix winner, and with numerous top 10 invitational finishes this year. He has been dominant on the Wizards circuit, came to play the Star City circuit, and has been equally dominant there.
Yeah, he's just an incredible Magic player, currently ranked 3rd in the world, a former invitational champion, 3-time Grand Prix champion, Pro Tour top 8 competitor, has competed in Worlds multiple times, only 24 years old, really one of the shining stars of the game.
You see something like 4 invitational top 8s, and you might think, hey, that's not as many as some of the other people we have on here, but there's the hidden statistic of he hasn't played very many invitationals.
If you look at his conversion rate, top 8s to events played,
his batting average is off the charts.
It's incredible.
And with Reid on 6 cards, I think you're right that it doesn't seem as punishing. If you look at last game, Reid only even used half of his hand there. It was a Divining Top, which actually didn't really, early on, it really just felt like he used a Brainstorm and a Terminus.
He could have assembled it in a couple different ways. The Divining Top, of course, important, but really, that game was all about Terminus.
Yeah, I suppose he did need a Swords to Plowshares to shore it up.
Yeah.
Well, with Ross on the play, he's boarded in some of his disruption. Turn 1, it will be Thoughtseize at Reid Duke.
I was interested to see if Ross was going to bring these in because I think that he has to absolutely bring in the Abrupt Decays, and he needs some anti-artifact cards as well. So once you're talking about bringing in the discard spells as well, that's just a lot of slots.
And a really aggressive play from Reid here. He's going to Force of Will the Thoughtseize pitching counterspell. So what is worth protecting at this level?
I would say that Sensei's Divining Top is near the top of the list. Counterbalance maybe as well. And potentially Peacekeeper, although I doubt it because Ross has access to Abrupt Decay.
It is a turn 1 Divining Top from Reid. So if you're Ross, you have to wonder if a Counterbalance is going to follow it up. If Ross spent turn 1 casting Thoughtseize, he probably can't slip under Countertop.
Though post-board, Ross becomes a little bit more robust against it because he has access to Abrupt Decay. That's why I suspect Reid probably is not protecting a counterbalance because Ross can just blow it up if he has Abrupt Decay. It's not worth Force of Willing. I think this is just about Reid's desire to have Divining Top in the first place.
Sure. Well, now Ross will start the Elf train. It's Wirewood Symbiote and Birchlore Rangers on turn 2. 2 creatures on the board. Reid will go ahead and spin his top on upkeep.
Yeah, and as I mentioned here, he's not just firing off a counterbalance. So that Force of Will was just about protecting the Divining Top, nothing else.
Really shows just how important Sensei's Divining Top is to Miracles.
It's the whole deck. I mean, when the deck does not have access to this card, it's just a reasonable control deck. When it is topping, you have Terminus and Entreated Instant Speed. You have incredible selection. Your draw steps are good. The interaction with counterbalance is incredible, of course. It's just an entirely different deck.
All right, Ross will go ahead for Green Sun Zenith. That's for 2. Trying to assemble, I would imagine, the combo of Wirewood Symbiote and Elvish Visionary. It's one of the ways that he can pull ahead on cards for Miracles. But Reid is going to have a response to that. Looks like he will cast Swords to Plowshares on the symbiote before Ross can get the creature.
He does not want Ross assembling that synergy. And he probably has to Swords to Plowshares the Wirewood symbiote at some point anyway, so you might as well do it now.
Well, when symbiote's in play, you can't really Swords anything else.
Correct. I gotta say, I really like, it's subtle, but Ice Age Basics, Ice Age Counterspells, Ice Age Swords to Plowshares. Reid playing with some cards from his childhood. Just awesome.
Force of Wills from Alliances.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
there's no
part of-
Ice Age. There's no
Right.
Ice Age Force of Will. I'm saying of
Yeah.
the cards that he was able to play, Pyroblast. Those were from Ice
That's
Age.
from Ice Age. No, you're absolutely right. His Brainstorms are Ice Age Brainstorms
Yep.
as well. I think that's all he can play from Ice Age. But Ross, with showing him up a little bit here, is going to play another Wirewood Symbiote off of the Visionary and Birchlore Rangers. And he'll immediately go ahead and bounce that Elvish Visionary back to his hand.
Yeah, he gets a free attack for one, and he's going to do it anyway, so he might as well do it now.
You see there Ross flipping around the Wirewood Symbiote to show that he has used its ability, has the limitation of only being able to use it once each turn.
So this is a pretty nice start here for Ross, and this is the kind of start that allows him to weather the storm of Terminus. He's going to generate a lot of cards. He's not just trying to push through the combo as fast as possible, so Reid's Sweeper not as good as it normally is.
So the Miracles deck a lot of times tries to one-for-one removal trade with their opponent, maybe play a sweeper, and then use the fact that they have Divining Top to pull ahead on card quality. If Ross has Visionary and Symbiote, it seems like that will be hard for Reid to accomplish.
For sure. He still has access to counterspells to shut down the Visionary, but the Elves deck is pretty redundant. So Ross going with a different angle of attack is very hard for him to just beat Terminus if he's trying to combo through. So he can bring in discard, sources of card advantage, and try to play a different game.
Reid spun top on upkeep, then just pass back. Ross replaying Visionary. It's going to resolve, but Reid does Swords to Plowshares a Symbiote again, this time trying to keep Ross off that card advantage. But the Elves deck with so much redundancy is going to go ahead and Zenith for one. Is it going to be another Symbiote?
I suspect that it is. Again, Ross has definitely set up a game plan here. He knows that Reid's not going to put him under that much pressure. And so he can just do this. He still gets to attack for a point of damage or two here. Reid has to answer this board, and Ross still has a handful of cards. This is in stark contrast to game one, where Ross has no real plan of action other than to just dump my hand on the table and hope that it's good enough.
Well, that just really is it. Ross has had 5 or more cards in his hand the entire game.
And I like Ross taking this approach to the matchup because Reid gets another copy of Terminus post-board. He gets a copy of Supreme Verdict. He's much more resilient against the flood the board and try to kill you very quickly plan. So Ross shifting gears a little bit and trying to play a slower game.
You see Reid spinning his Divining Top on end step there. Supreme Verdict among the cards that he saw.
But look at this board. This is not that attractive of a board to Supreme Verdict when your opponent still has several cards left in their hand, one of which is Elvish Visionary.
So Ross is pulling ahead on cards, but what about counterbalance? I mean, if Reid can get counterbalance on Divining Top, does it matter that Ross has all these cards if Reid can counter all of them?
Well, among the cards that Ross gets to look at along the way here is his copies of Abrupt Decay. And that's another problem for Reid. He can't just go ahead and assume that that lock is going to work because Ross has the ability to blow it up post-board.
So Reid went ahead and tapped his Divining Top to get his 4th land, its Flooded Strand. Cracking the Flooded Strand to get his 4th mana, it will allow him to cast his Sweeper like Supreme Verdict, but he no longer has a Divining Top at the moment as he shuffled it away.
I suspect that if Reid is making this play, if it is Supreme Verdict, not 100% sure, he has to have another Divining Top because Ross's board is fairly anemic right now, and it doesn't seem worth losing the Divining Top to sweep up this unless you have another Divining Top. It also could be Jace the Mind Sculptor.
I think you're absolutely right. Though there was a Supreme Verdict there, it is Jace the Mind Sculptor.
This is part of the risk of taking a really slow approach is Ross only with 2 points of power in play right now. So this Jace is at minimum going to get to brainstorm twice.
Yeah. Reid is going to match Ross's card draw with his own card draw, and Reid's card draw very potent. Uses the 0 ability on Jace to brainstorm once here.
And this puts Ross into a bit of a bind. If you try to keep your board lean to resist sweepers, then suddenly cards like Swords of Plowshares mean that you can't get to Jace. If you add too much to the board, the sweepers start mattering again. So this is a challenging dance for Ross here. He definitely does not want Jace to stick in play for any more than, a maximum of 2 turns, if he can avoid it.
Absolutely. So with the Brainstorm, that taps Reid out. He passes back over to Ross, who gets to untap with 2 power. Almost enough to take down Jace, but it's 1 short. See if he can get something else going on with it. He'll start with Elvish Visionary yet again.
And this is sort of the risk with the line of play that Ross took last turn to preemptively bounce the Visionary. He left him with less than 3 power in play, which means that Reid had a window to get Jason to play in Brainstorm.
So if Ross waits there and maybe doesn't bounce the Visionary, he loses a card out of the deal, but maybe threatens the Jace.
Yeah, but the flip side is he's much more exposed to a sweeper because he can only bounce one of his elves, not he still
both.
loses an elf plus a symbiote. So he takes risk in either direction. And that's part of the challenge of the matchup. There's a lot of things that Ross needs to play around.
Well, it looks like Ross, rather than trying to answer the Jace, is just going to keep going for card advantage. He used 2 to first cast the Visionary, tapped Visionary and Birchlow Rangers to make a green mana, then went ahead and bounced the Visionary to untap the Rangers and recast Visionary for another card. He'll attack Jace down to 1 and just pass back. And Reid with a Terminus that he brainstormed on top of his deck.
So now we're going to have this card advantage fight here. Reid still with Jace in play. Ross is not going to be able to kill it next turn. And we're looking at a Brainstorm this turn and most likely a Brainstorm next turn as well at the minimum.
Wow, so Reid with threatening to get a second and third activation off of Jace. Now, I know the game is far from over, but when an opponent gets to activate Jace 3 times, that can be real close to losing the game.
It is, though Ross has been essentially chasing himself for several turns. He's drawn a lot of cards.
Well, it's going to be a card draw fight. Reid uses his remaining 3 mana and graveyard to delve up a Dig Through Time. This is all before his Jace has been used. See just what he can put together. Looks like he takes Counter Spell and another card here. And we'll see where he goes from this spot. Now he'll take the Brainstorm off Jace. So netting 2 extra cards this turn, and not just two raw cards. He got to pick which ones they were.
Both players kind of working with a fresh 7 at this point.
You think that favors Reid, right?
I believe so, though Ross, again, he has answers to Reid's lock. The big risk here is Ross is playing this pretty slow game, and Reid might just blow the whole thing up and then treat the Angels. That's always a risk, so Ross can only play the game so slowly.
Yeah, once Reid makes 4/4s, Ross does not have an answer to them.
You can't block flyers, can't really kill them outside of Abrupt Decay, which is not a great answer.
All right, Ross is going to have to commit to the board here. It's going to be Heritage Druid, Nettle Sentinel, Nettle Sentinel. We may see a combo turn coming up here. And yeah, he's going to start by making 3 green mana. This is a source of a lot of mana that he can make. So cast Elvish Visionary, floating 1 green. That untaps both his Nettle Sentinels, draws a card. So still has a green floating, has a chance to make 4 mana if need be. And a Natural Order is in his hand. So at the very least, he can untap with 0 lands in play and 0 creatures in play and just get a Natural Order off. It's one of the strengths of Elves.
It can go off from a very low base. Probably not this turn, and if Reid has another sweeper, then things become very problematic. But for the time being, he's putting a lot of pressure on Reid to find that second sweeper.
Elvish Visionary and the 2 Nettle Sentinels tap. That brings Ross up to 4 green mana. We'll see Ross has both copies of Green Sun's Zenith and Natural Order in his hand. And he's going to go for Green Sun's Zenith. We'll see for how much here. It does untap both Nettle Sentinels. It's for 1, so 2 mana still floating. Got a copy of Wirewood Symbiote.
And, Ross trying to do what he can to add to the board while insulating himself from another sweeper. So this puts a lot of pressure on Reid. It potentially represents a kill next turn. And in the event that Reid has some sort of sweeper, Ross can bounce his Visionary this turn with his 2 remaining mana, put it back into play, draw another card, have the ability to return the Visionary back to his hand in the case of a sweeper. Still bad for him that Reid has Jace online in that world, but at least he's keeping up in terms of the raw card count fight.
Yeah, 2 green mana floating for Ross. He'll go ahead and use the Visionary. The Symbiote. It bounces Visionary, untaps Heritage Druid. That gets him up to 5 green, uses 2 of the 5 to cast Elvish Visionary again, draws a card. So 3 green floating. He'll play a land for the turn and crack. So this now still 3 green, potential to get 7. And going to continue going with the turn right now. And his fetch was for Dryad Arbor right now. So Ross is really, he's committing to the board very hard right now. Mana's number 4 through 6 added to the added. So he has 6 green at the moment. It's going to be Green Sun Zenith once again. And the crazy part about this hand is this started off nothing, off 3 lands, and this has all been 1 turn. He's going to go ahead and Zenith for 2, 4 green mana floating, gets another copy of Wirewood Symbiote. And this really just does insulate himself against a sweeper. He could pick up almost his whole team if Reid sweeps this board.
And keep in mind, it's a weird dimension of this matchup that Terminus is Reid's sweeper, which puts everything on the bottom. The Green Sun Zenith shuffled back in. So Ross kind of has a lot of redundancy built into his deck. Even if he gets hit by a sweeper, it's not like he loses these Visionaries forever.
So he'll use 1 Elvish Visionary, Wirewood Symbiote to bounce the Visionary again, and then goes ahead and recasts Elvish Visionary another time. That would put him down to 4 mana. He tapped 3 up to 7, is now down to 5 green. Taps again. This is going to be Quirion Ranger, and he has a ton of green, putting the whole board into play with multiple Quirion Rangers, and it's going to end with a natural order. So playing the entire hand right now, sacrificing a Quirion Ranger. This is going to be a very big Crater Hoof, and it should be enough to take down the Jace at the very least if it doesn't kill Reid.
Well, I mean, we're doing a price check on the number of creatures to play. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
So it will be a 5/5. It turns into a 13/13 trample. We'll see where he sends it. It could be at Reid. It could just be at Jace. And leaving the Planeswalker alone, he's going to put Reid down to 2, I believe.
This is, again, putting...
Oh, it's 1. Right, it counts itself. It's down to 1.
Yes.
Ross was just 1 creature short of making it lethal.
But still, even with, Reid obviously is in sweeper or bust territory.
This all came off an empty board from Ross.
But Ross still gets to pick up some things with the symbiote in the event that Reid is able to find something to contain the board.
What it does mean now is for Ross Merriam, every creature is a lethal attacker. Reid will have to kill everything on sight. And that includes things like a fetch land from Ross that could get an end-step Dryad Arbor.
Yeah, it takes very little to win the game here. Reid's fetch land is shut off.
And Reid does have one of his copies of Supreme Verdict. Ross will use Quirion Ranger to bounce the Dryad Arbor.
Further insulation.
Remember, it is a forest. Now he'll use the Symbiotes to bounce a Quirion Ranger and an Elvish Visionary. Rest of the creatures do get hit by Supreme Verdict, so six cards to the graveyard.
This is a very impressive display from Ross here. I mean, he is just fighting through Jason sweepers.
Gets to untap with 5 cards in hand. He has the Duke down to 1, but Reid has an empty board and a Jace. It's going to be hard for Ross to make progress, headway into it, but he only needs to get 1 attacker through.
And Visionary plus Dryad Arbor is that's hard to kill.
Absolutely. So it'll be,
if Reid tries to answer with Entreat, well, then he's got to be able to block everything, and Ross can put a lot of stuff into play.
It'll be Elvish Visionary and Quirion Ranger into play. Reid will then play Dryad Arbor. The Ranger gives him an insurance against a sweeper. 3 creatures into play. He forces Reid to have yet another sweeper.
And a lot of diversity in the mana cost, too, so Engineer Explosives is not that helpful.
Now, post-board, Reid does have 5 sweepers, 2 copies of Supreme Verdict and 3 copies of Terminus. But he has already used a Supreme Verdict and I believe a Terminus as well. So 3 remaining. And not much life gain in Reid's deck. He can entreat the Angels, and Swords to Plowshares one of his own Angels.
And I think his Swords to Plowshares are pretty taxed at this stage.
So he needs an entreat at some point here, I would think. He can't keep killing everything forever. Or maybe he can can he still countertop Ross at this point? 1 is such a scary life total to be at.
Ross has looked at so many cards and has, Reid is not giving him an opportunity to cast Abrupt Decay that if I'm in Reid's seat, I don't think it's good.
All right, well, Reid with Brainstorm is going to go ahead and use another Supreme Verdict. Ross will try again. He'll pick up the Dryad Arbor, lose 2 creatures. Reid keeps the board clean yet again, and it passes back. The problem card, we're at a guess here, though, is that Dryad Arbor. Reid can't counter it.
No.
Especially if Ross has something like a fetch land, it becomes even more difficult. I suppose if Reid has no answer, he can always use Jace to unsummon the Dryad Arbor.
Well, if it's coming off a fetch land, then
Right.
it's a big trouble.
Well, Ross has another lethal threat here. That's going to be Deathrite Shaman. The black ability on Deathrite Shaman would be lethal to Reid. Ross does have black mana available. This is another must-kill threat. And this is one that Reid actually can't answer with Entreat the Angels either. He can't block it. And here's a scare one. Fetch land from Ross. There is another copy of Dryad Arbor in his deck.
Just another dimension of attack.
So Reid needs an instant speed sweeper, or he needs a way to deal with both these cards. You see in his hand, he does have an engineered explosives, so that can take care of, well, it can take care of the Deathrite Shaman, but that's not an answer yet for the Dryad Arbor. Engineered explosives destroys non-land permanents.
And now with Reid electing to brainstorm here, he's got to come up with multiple answers or a terminus at instant speed.
Yeah, he cannot let Ross untap with this Deathrite Shaman. Brainstorm from Reid digs him one card deeper. It looks like he has a copy of Vendilion Click. That could do in a pinch. It's a blocker. It is a target for an Abrupt Decay, but it may be the risk Reid needs to take. See him leaving in his hand Counterspell next to Engineered Explosives. Another copy of Jace here, a counterbalance. Resolve second Brainstorm. And it will be a land, followed by the Engineered Explosives. Here's the answer to Deathrite Shaman. It's set to 1, he'll crack it. Deathrite Shaman's taken care of. Threat number 1 down, but the biggest threat is still on the table.
Vendilion Click in Reid's hand as a potential blocker, but, does Ross just not have any Abrupt Decays? He's drawn a ton of cards and hasn't really had an opportunity to do very much with them.
Well, Ross is going to go ahead and fetch for that Dryad Arbor on end step. On the turn where Ross 14'd Reid, he did play out all his cards, so he would have had to have drawn an Abrupt Decay since then. So there's a reasonable suspicion for Reid that this Vendilion Click will work, but it certainly is not a sure bet.
It is what he has to do,
Yeah, and it looks like that's what he's all in on. If he makes that play, his only land left will be a fetch land, but at 1, that's not a land at all. Ross drawing for the turn, and he'll swing with Dryad Arbor. Is it good enough? Vendilion Click comes in here. We'll see who it targets, and if Ross has the Abrupt Decay, Click will target Reid. He'll put Counterbalance to the bottom and draw. Can Ross kill it? It looks like no. The Dryad Arbor trades away, so Reid is still alive.
Hanging on for at least one more turn. Reid is a tough dude to put away.
It's going to be Quirion Ranger for Ross. Now, is there a chance that Ross wanted to play that one pre-combat to save his Dryad Arbor? We see him play another one out of hand here.
I think with another Dryad Arbor, he's happy to make the trade.
Another update here. Tom Ross, a 2-1 winner over Steve Mann. So both players at 1-1 right now. Mann picking up his first loss, Ross with his first win. On our other match, Brad Nelson and Brian Braunduin have evened things up at 1 apiece. They'll be moving to Game 3. Time permitting, we'll try to join to that match as well.
So this might be settling in to be a long one here.
Absolutely. Reid untaps 7 mana in play. Still at 1, he has to answer everything, but it's looking like he might just get there. He brainstorms with Jace, and now it's a second Jace, and he's going to have to use that Jace to unsummon Quirion Ranger.
Still somehow hanging on.
It's like, once you start getting the mode where Jace is unsummoning things, that's... All right, well, he unsummons the Ranger, he Swords to Plowshares the Dryad Arbor, Reid is at 1, and Ross doesn't have attackers yet again.
So this is really awesome here for Reid insofar as he's gotten the Dryad Arbors out of the equation. The fetch lands are now safe.
Yep, there are only 2 Dryad Arbors in Ross's deck, and they've both been taken care of. Ross's draw for the turn is a Thoughtseize. We'll see if Reid wants to use a Counterspell on it. I believe he has the card Counterspell in his hand. And he may counter it because if it's a clear choice that Ross is just going to take the Counterspell, he might as well deny the information.
Yeah, no reason not to.
And we see Quirion Ranger from Ross, Gaia's Cradle, and then the last card in his hand is a copy of Green Sun Zenith. He'll get Deathrite Shaman. That's another pair of lethal cards.
Shuts off and treat the Angels as an out.
Also shuts off by putting 2 threats on the board. Jace and his -1 ability is not enough here either.
Right.
Go back to redo. Can he answer 2 more creatures yet again? He'll Brainstorm to start. Putting 2 lands back. And Sensei's Divining Top.
So this gets him one card deeper.
Yep, so spin the top, go 1 deeper. He finds it's a white card. We don't know exactly what it is.
He can source the Plowshares.
So that plus Jace will keep him alive. If only for a turn. He's just got to grind his way through all of Ross's cards. Ross is out of cards in hand now. So yeah, puts the swords to the top, draws it with Divining Top, uses swords to Plowshares to take care of Deathrite Shaman. Jace -1s to bounce Quirion Ranger. Reid has survived, but his top 3 cards are Divining Top, land. They're not any good anymore.
I've never seen someone at 1 with Jace active for this many.
So Ross will play Quirion Ranger and then play a face-down Birchler Rangers. That's as a morph, and actually just have the morph token sitting to the side here.
This is also a first for me seeing this card face down in the game of Constructed. And Ross just, can I finally put this guy out?
Well, playing it face down gives him insurance over cards like Engineered Explosives. Sometimes you see them cast it on 3 to try to get around counterbalance.
Yep. There's also, it's just one of those no reason not to sort of things.
He's got extra mana, but it's 2 more creatures that Reid has to enter. Jace is only an answer. Jace is only an answer to 1 of them. So we go back to Reid's turn. Draws Divining Top and plays it. Spins top to look at the top 3 cards. 2 of them are lands, 1 of them is new.
This has been an incredible game from both of these players.
And it's going to be a copy of Brainstorm. Council's Judgment, it looks like, is what he found. That may keep him alive for yet another turn. But it does mean he'll have to lose his Jace in the process. See, he keeps trying to dig 1 card deeper, and with his last dig, he finds a copy of Terminus.
Unbelievable.
And he goes to Ross's turn, and it is the Terminus. And Reid takes care of Ross's final card on the board. If Ross does not draw a threat, Reid can start brainstorming with the Jace.
Oh, my God.
And Ross draws a card and just passes back. This may have been the last straw here. I think Reid has turned the corner now.
Well, he's looking at a Council's Judgment and some lands here. He's going to start Fatal Sealing himself to get a little more insulation, get another look at it with Divining Top.
Yep, by scrying 1 card to the bottom, he gets to look 1 deeper. He'll pass back. Ross plays Sylvan Library. This is a great draw for Ross at this point. He can just start going through lots of cards.
Just 1-for-1s are not going to do it, but unfortunately for him, I think Reid is still floating that Council's Judgment, so he can shut off this line of play.
Yeah, we'll see if he does that. Reid scries another card to the bottom. Jace goes up to 5, draws. Before he wants to draw for turn, he goes ahead and spins top, and now he will cast Council's Judgment. He will take care of Sylvan Library. Ross back to no permanence. We pass back to Ross.
So it's not that much different in this spot for Reid to be brainstorming versus Jacing himself because of the Divining Top, and it does mean that he's getting closer and closer to a kill. I mean, this performance from Reid at 1 with that Jace, 6-7 turns.
Oh yeah, this is excellent. Just threading the needle here. We see another spin of the Divining Top. Jace is now up to 7, continues to scry cards to the bottom for Reid. Ross's hand is Glimpse of Nature and a couple others. He may have enough in the tank for 1 more shot if he can get there. He'd need a good glimpse turn, but it could happen.
But Reid's, his draw has improved incredibly. He now has Force of Will, which he can hard cast. He has access to a lot of removal. Now Dig Through Time he's looking at.
And the Dig Through Time might be just the nail in the coffin that he needs. We'll see here. He's going to go ahead and brainstorm with the Jace so he can get +1 on cards here. And he'll just pass. We go over to Ross, drawing another card. Now is up to 4 cards in hand. Ross is trying to assemble that 1 good punch to see if he can get the damage through. But without any more Dryad Arbors to fetch for, it is going to be hard for Ross to get a damage through. And he chooses decides now is the time, he'll start with Glimpse of Nature.
I'm curious to see, does Reid shut this off right now by casting Force of Will? Does he dig through time first for a little more information?
Yeah, remember that Glimpse of Nature, actually, Ross will get to draw the card every time he casts a creature spell, and it doesn't matter whether those spells resolve or not. So if Reid lets this resolve, Ross may draw a lot of cards regardless of what happens here. He'll start with Deathrite Shaman. Reid lets that one happen. Ross draws. And Elvish Visionary. If that one works, it'll be 2 cards for Ross. Reid may not be okay with that. And now is the time. Reid does Force of Will the Elvish Visionary. Ross only gets 1 card off it. But still does get to draw the card.
But still keeping Ross's board at 1 creature, which means the worst case scenario, Jace can contain it. And if he finds more action off this dig through time, he can go back to Brainstorming or Fate Sealing as appropriate.
Right, really wants to make sure that Ross doesn't get a second threat. And Reid does have enough mana here to use Dig Through Time on to end step.
He's found his Baneslayer Angel.
So maybe that is the win con instead of Entreat that is here, going to a leaner way to win the game.
And that Baneslayer Angel's already done some work in this tournament. It was the card that eliminated Dylan Donegan.
And it may be the card that evens up this pod at 1-1 for all competitors involved. And Reid Duke just staying at 1 for so long, showing this great patience and just staying alive for one more turn, eventually finding the terminus. And the Baneslayer Angel will be good. If Reid can get a hit in with that and gain 5 life, there's no way that Ross will have enough reach to deal 6.
So much of what Ross has been doing the last half dozen turns or so is trying to squeeze through 1 point. Reid's beating him on the card advantage access. He's got a substantially better board. As you mentioned, 1 Baneslayer Angel hit, and then he's got to try to beat Jace plus Baneslayer plus Reid's full hand of cards, and I just don't think it can be done.
Well, Jace will unsummon the Deathrite Shaman. That'll keep Reid alive for another turn. And Reid lets Ross draw and casts Vendilion Click. He'll get to see what Ross's hand is, and we'll see it as well. It's Glimpse of Nature, Abrupt Decay, Gaia's Cradle, Natural Order, and Deathrite Shaman. We'll see if anything, Reid wants to take. It seems like the information is really what he was after.
I think he just wants to know if the coast is clear for Baneslayer Angel here. That's the big incentive here. He doesn't need this Vendilion Click to win.
Well, how scary is Natural Order? It does let Ross get a haste creature into play if it were ever to resolve.
Well, Reid is still sitting on that Force of Will, so he always has the option of just countering the Natural Order. He has 5 mana available.
Ross, only 3 mana sources. That Gaia's Cradle doesn't make anything as there's no creatures in play. He'll just pass back. Reid gets another turn. And it's another copy of Dig Through Time. And this should give Reid all the answers he needs. We see another Force of Will. He can hard cast them at this point among the 7 cards. Another copy of Jace. There is a copy of Entreat the Angels in there as well. Perhaps that's how Reid's going to win the game.
An issue here is Reid can't tap out just yet because the Force of Will is in protection. With him at 1. He needs to either, get to 10 mana to be able to cast Baneslayer, or feel like the coast is clear enough for him to do that.
Well, if he brainstorms the Entreat to the top, he can do it on end step. If he uses Jace to put it there. We'll see. Reid's going to spin Divining Top. And now we're going to go to his turn. Reid draws for the turn. Another land. And this one's a Brainstorm off Jace. And he may just go for that play. It looks like he is going to put Entreat the Angels back on top of his deck using Jace. Has another basic for the turn.
And he can just 1-hit kill now. He can just pass.
Swing for 3. Yeah, this is going to be it. He's going to go for the kill on this end step.
Hard cast the Force of Will if something dangerous comes up, and otherwise just Entreat for the whole load.
Ross tries to win this turn. We'll see. It's Glimpse of Nature from Ross. Reid lets it resolve. Elvish Visionary. That could draw 2 cards. Reid's fine with that one too.
He doesn't have to fight over this. Only a creature with haste. That's the only thing that Reid has to worry about here.
Yep. And Ross passes the turn. And this is going to be it. Sensei's Divining Top tapped. It's going to be Entreat the Angels. And there you have it. 2-0. Reid Duke, the winner over Ross Merriam, evens it up in the pod. Both players at 1-1.
Another really special game from Reid. We've had a couple of them his match against Dylan Donegan, Game 3, was an awesome one, and this one just hanging on for dear life for so long. Dug as far as he possibly could with all of his brainstorm, Jaces, and Divine Tops, found the Terminus as the last card, and from there, locked the game up. Just really impressive stuff from Reid Duke.
And what this means for both competitors is going into the last round of the group stage, they are going to really want a win here. A loss means they will end up in the bottom of the group, possibly eliminated or facing elimination, whereas a win could put them straight through to the top 4.
Yep, a lot riding on all these matches. You know, there's a lot of money at stake, and a loss could potentially eliminate any of these competitors.
For Ross, it was a loss.